world-famous musician dies and leaves his daughters his prized instrument.
His love, his treasure, his heart, his voice.
It's more than 300 years old and could be worth many millions. But this strange inheritance is about more than money. It's about a European countess, a father's legacy, and a huge financial dilemma for his heirs.
It was very clear to us that he did not want it to be hidden away.
I'm Jamie Colby, and I'm on Cape Cod, Massachusetts, heading to the small town of Wellfleet.
I'm here to learn about a strange inheritance that shaped a family's life for half a century.
My name is Elena Del Banco. In 2011, my sister and I inherited an extraordinary object from our father. This was my father's home for many years. He and my mother built it in 1955.
Elena's father was the virtuoso cellist Bernard Greenhouse, who died in 2011 at the age of 95. Greenhouse spent most of his career playing with the renowned Beaux-Arts Trio, which made its debut in 1955 and catapulted to fame.
He was very warm and very charming, but very involved with his work. And he traveled all the time as he became more and more successful.
As one of the world's premier cellists, Bernard figured he should be playing one of the world's finest cellos. He began searching in Europe for an instrument equal to his talent.
He went to dealers and to instrument shops. And wherever he went, he said, "Have you heard any rumors about great cellos?"
In 1957, he found one in the West German city of Aachen.
Your father came home with something he longed for, searched for.
I was very young, but I knew that he had found something very important.
Very important, indeed. It was a Stradivarius, crafted in Italy around 1707 by the master of them all, Antonio Stradivari. It even has its own aristocratic title, the Countess of Steinlein. Sound expensive? It was.
It was a huge sum of money for us, for our family. And it made a huge difference in our lives to pay it off over many years.
Dealers estimate Bernard paid around $100,000, an astronomical sum in the late 1950s, when the average American house sold for $18,000. But for Greenhouse, the instrument became a part of him.
He called it every superlative you could call it. His love, his treasure, his heart, his voice.
At the height of his career, Greenhouse performed nearly 200 times a year.
I always wanted to hop in the cello case and travel with my father wherever he was going.
When Greenhouse wasn't in concert, he taught at the Manhattan School of Music, Juilliard, and here at home in his Cape Cod studio. This is where Elena also played the cello as a child.
You sometimes put your name in his appointment book to try to get time with him in lieu of a lesson, erasing the name of a student that was actually coming.
I didn't do that to get a cello lesson. I did that to get an hour of his time.
Did you ever play the Strad?
No, never.
Why?
I never played well enough to play the Strad.
By whose opinion?
I guess by my father's, but I never wanted to.
Can I hear him play?
I would love it. Having the music is wonderful. It's hard, but wonderful. Isn't that beautiful?
Wow.
Haunting.
What's the first thing you do when you have to decide whether to keep or sell the family jewel?
I think the first question you ask yourself is, do you have any use for or love for the family jewel? And then I think a big part of it also is, can you afford to keep the family jewel?
The financial implications of this strange inheritance worry Elena and her husband Nicholas, who are both college professors nearing retirement.
What would have it entailed to keep the Strad? Insurance? Storage?
And coming up, of course, with the taxes that the government wants.
Did you hear from them?
No, they just said, let those people keep their inheritance. We have so many other people. Yes, of course.
So does that weigh into whether you have to sell something, the fact that you have to pay taxes?
Absolutely.
So what should Elena's family do? They decide it's too expensive to keep the Strad. They're keenly aware that a successful auction could yield millions, quite a nice nest egg in retirement. But selling a 300-year-old Stradivarius is no small undertaking.
It's a cutthroat world in the world of musical instruments. We came to understand all kinds of things that could go wrong.
That's next.
But first, our strange inheritance quiz question. What percentage of an inheritance does the federal government currently tax? 30%, 40%, or 50%? The answer when we return. So what percentage of an inheritance does the federal government currently tax? The answer is B, 40%, after the first $5.3 million are deducted.
When master cellist Bernard Greenhouse dies at the age of 95, his heirs face a quandary: what to do with his beloved Stradivarius, worth millions of dollars.
My father, in his will, left the cello to me and to my sister. He left no instructions. He was unable to confront the sale of the cello. And he preferred to let us figure it out so that he could have it till the very last day of his life.
I'm in Boston to understand how Elena and her family deal with their strange inheritance. Elena does her homework and decides to sell the Strad through Chris Runing from Runing & Son. Chris is a rare instrument dealer. He's also a cellist and a luthier, someone who makes or repairs stringed instruments.
How do you decide what Bernard's Stradivarius is worth?
Well, I think the first thing you have to evaluate the quality. And then it also helps to know what the market history has been. So in the case of this cello, we did know what other Stradivari cellos had sold for, and we could compare the quality of this one to those.
Back in 2002, a similar cello sold for $5 million. But over the past several years, collectors have driven the price of rare instruments way up. And each one has its own history, a unique story that's a big factor in whether it fetches a 6, 7, or even 8-figure price at auction. Nobody knows this cello's story better than Elena's husband, Nicholas Delbanco. A novelist by trade, Delbanco actually wrote an entire book about the instrument. It's called The Countess of Steinlein Restored, and it describes the painstaking restoration his father-in-law commissioned for the Countess back in the 1990s.
The wear and tear on such instruments is very high. Aside from all the physical stress, there's change in climate, change in temperature, change in humidity. And at a certain point, the cello was almost as weary as he.
Nicholas's book details a harrowing process. The cello was popped open with a knife and sat in pieces for months while some of its wood was patched.
Bernie got more and more restless and more ready to have his heart's darling returned. He said, then I will never let it go again. And he never did.
But he did play the Strad for more than another decade, and he let his students play it too. In the last years of his life, Bernard remained so attached to the cello that he slept with it. Chris Runing believes every serious bidder will demand proof that the Countess has no significant hidden flaws.
In this case, we actually did a CT scan of the cello.
Like a doctor does?
Yes.
Is that unusual?
We don't do it very often, but in this case, there were some questions if there was a crack.
Chris Runing called me one day here at the shop and said, "John, I've got this cello that I need CT scanned right away."
Chris flies with the Strad to a hospital in Minnesota where experts are ready to diagnose the patient. The worry? Vast sums could be wiped from this multi-million-dollar sale if the Countess has damage from cracks or worse, wormholes made inside the cello by tiny larvae.
Would that equate to thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars?
Another quiz question. In 2013, a Picasso painting sold for a record $155 million. What's the record for a Stradivari instrument? 98.2 million, 15.9 million, or 45.2 million? The answer in a moment. So what's the highest price ever paid for a Stradivari instrument? The answer is B, $15.9 million for the Lady Blunt violin, sold in London in 2011.
In the fall of 2011, the heirs of Bernard Greenhouse anxiously await the results of a CT scan, not on a person, but on a 300-year-old Stradivari cello known as the Countess of Stainline. Millions of dollars are at stake. Radiologist Stephen Sir performed a scan just like this one.
The diseases that affect the old cellos, they're usually caused by two things. One is cracks. The other abnormality is wormholes carved by larvae which eat the channels of wood until sometimes there's hardly any original wood left.
What exactly is happening as it goes through?
The CT scanner produces X-rays, which are high-energy light beams and very thin sheet.
This is the actual CT scan of the Stradivarius. Chris shares with me his bottom line.
This cello has been in constant use since 1800, and it's always been a player's instrument, so it's been cared for beautifully. But there are cracks.
Whatever tiny cracks there might be, they don't affect the cello's unique sound. Chris is able to set the official opening bid for Bernard Greenhouse's Stradivari cello at a cool $6.2 million. There's just one hitch. The Delbancos might not accept the highest bid if it's from some rich investor who just wants to lock the Countess away in a vault.
A cello is only half, perhaps not even half itself, if unheard. It had been his express desire and conviction that it be played.
And you made a decision that the Strad was better in the hands of someone who could play it than on the shelf of someone who would pay more for it?
Well, potentially pay more for it, but we just didn't want it on a shelf.
So the idea was that they would be able to open the bids, look at all the factors, the price, who's buying it, and choose one of those bids.
Chris agrees to this unusual condition. It's not every day you get to sell a 300-year-old Stradivarius. So off he goes with the Countess on a world marketing tour.
All the cellists that I showed it to were completely shocked about the sound. All of them said it was the best cello they'd ever played.
I had to wonder, is the sound of a Strad really so divine? After all, researchers recently blindfolded professional musicians and had them play violins, mixing historic Strads with top new ones. Most said they preferred the sound of modern instruments. So I asked Boston Symphony Orchestra cellist Mikhail Jojatu to play two cellos for me, one modern and one from the 18th century, and not tell me which was which.
Can you play each one to see if somebody who doesn't know as much as you do can tell the difference?
Sure, my pleasure.
You listen too. What do you think?
That was spectacular. So to me, that sounds as good as it gets.
Beautiful.
Let's try this one.
I have to say that the sound sounded to me richer, deeper.
You have a good ear.
Really?
Yes,
I'm shocked.
This is a good quality modern cello. It's a couple years old. And this is Mikhail's cello. This was made in what year?
In 1780.
I had one more request.
If I were a student of yours, could you teach me to play one note?
Sure.
Chris, would you let me?
I suppose, yes.
You suppose. Oh, I sense hesitation.
No, I trust you.
Am I hurting the value of this cello?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I better stop.
Returning to the tale of the Countess of Steinlein, it isn't long before sealed bids start coming in. In Boston, Chris sits down with the Delbancos to open them and pick a buyer.
What was the emotion in the room when you opened the first bid for Elena and Nicholas to look at?
You know, there was not a dry eye in the room because this cello was so much part of their life and signified her relationship to her father.
Saying goodbye to the Countess of Steinlein was more painful than I expected it to be. We all sat down in a little seating group in his office, and we put the cello as part of the seating group, and I began to feel more and more upset. And we just closed the case. And I've never seen it again.
In the end, the greenhouse heirs accept a bid they feel they cannot refuse. It comes not from a cello virtuoso, but from a foreign billionaire. But that's one last twist to this story when we return on Strange Inheritance. Eight months after virtuoso cellist Bernard Greenhouse dies, his heirs accept a secret bid on their Stradivari cello. The price? All the auctioneer will say is that it's significantly higher than the $6.2 million opening bid.
What's significantly higher than $6.2 million?
Yeah, the reason I'm not disclosing the price is out of respect to the buyer.
A fair bid to me is 15 to 20% higher. Significantly higher is 50% higher. Is it between 15% and 50%?
Good try.
Okay, so I tried. And the Delbancos are keeping it a secret, too. But in the end, were they able to honor Greenhouse's wish that the Countess be played and not shut away in a vault or museum? The buyer, it turns out, is a Canadian billionaire, Jacqueline Desmarais. She decides to permanently loan the Countess to a 20-year-old Canadian virtuoso named Stéphane Tétrault.
I've known about Bernard Greenhouse for years. He's a huge figure in music history. To have the chance to even touch his cello was just an honor.
After the auction, the Delbancos never intended to see the Countess again.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
But then we offered them a chance to meet Stéphane for the first time at the Carriage House Recital Hall near Boston. As I listen, I can't help but think that if Stéphane performs as long as Greenhouse did, the Countess of Steinlein will be heard for many decades to come.
That was lovely.
Bravo.
So good to hear you play.
What a pleasure to meet both of you.
And you.
Really.
Really, that was very
awesome.
beautiful.
I was quite nervous, actually.
What a great pleasure.
Pleasure.
Let me just... Oh, there she is.
So in this tale of music and money, The Delbancos seem satisfied that they have found a way to split the difference.
More money might have made a difference in your life. How do you walk away from that?
There's never enough. If you think in those terms, an extra $1 million or $6 million would hardly have mattered.
I think it was a very special Strad, and I think we're really happy with the outcome.
Before we go, I want to share this last thought. You know, years ago, back in the old days, Bernard Greenhouse and the trio could count on a break from the airlines when they had to fly the cello, allowing Bernard to buy a child's ticket at half price. Well, once at the airport, a ticket agent called Mr. Greenhouse over after seeing the name Cello on the ticket and said, "Mr. Greenhouse, how old is your son Cello?" To which Bernard laughed, winked, and responded, 250 years old. I'm Jamie Colby. Thanks so much for joining us on Strange Inheritance. And don't forget, you can't take it with you. Do you have a strange inheritance story you'd like to share with us? We'd love to hear it. Send me an email or go to our website, strangeinheritance.com.